It's only been a few weeks since Rishi Sunak announced his disastrous decision to call the general election in the rain. And now we are seeing the massive changes that that general election ensured, because the many new MPs, and there are a lot of them, have been delivering their maiden speeches. And one of them was Nigel Farage. He's the new MP for Clacton, just in case you didn't know. And I thought it was really quite shocking that this week I agreed with some of what Nigel said. This is quite unusual. But the first thing that I agreed with Nigel about is that this is indeed a massive Remainer Parliament. And those changes are something that I welcome and celebrate. The Brexiteer MPs have, or a lot of them, or most of them, have gone. And this means that largely the parliamentarians in the Commons mostly agree with each other, particularly around the fact that Britain is better off being as close to the European Union as possible. And that is quite something for us to celebrate. Not only that, Nigel conceded that he was more comfortable in the European Parliament, which is a much bigger chamber and a modern parliament, whereas our parliament is old and unfit for purpose, really. So I was actually quite glad to hear Nigel recognise the reality that we need change and we need a new modern parliament to make modern decisions for Britain.
And I wonder whether perhaps that's why so many in the British political system seem to adore the European Union so much, because it is a rather wonderful place to work. What I perhaps didn't expect was to come here and to find that I'm more outnumbered with my reform team, more outnumbered here than we were in the European Parliament, because there are more supporters of Brexit in the European Parliament than I sense there are in this Parliament of 2024. This is very much a Remainers Parliament. I suspect in many cases it's really a Rejoiners Parliament.
The reason Nigel felt it's a Remainer Parliament and that he's in a tiny minority was because of the number of speeches that have been delivered talking about the need and urgent need for Britain to get back to the European Union. So I have put together a selection of speeches for you to look at, and also to hear Keir Starmer, our new Prime Minister's response to that. And I would say that Keir Starmer at the moment is probably closer, the responses he's giving, closer to Nigel Farage and the Reform Party than the rest of the other MPs in his party. But he has to hold a line at the moment. But I would suggest that just the same as King Canute couldn't stop the tide, Keir Starmer will not stop the tsunami of strength of these MPs who will push to get back into the European Union. Their constituents will want it. Their local businesses, we know, want it because businesses are struggling so badly with Brexit. So I celebrate the result of our general election and I celebrate the new Parliament, and I'm grateful to Nigel for pointing out how fantastic this is.
Can I ask my right honourable friend, does he agree that the shift in relationship with the European Union led by the previous government has indeed made us economically poorer and undermined small businesses like the toy shop in my constituency in Horsforth, which closed? Can I ask, will he ensure that small businesses and their needs and prosperity will be at the heart of any renegotiation deal in 2 years' time?
Well, I'm grateful for that question. Look, there are businesses across the country who are dealing with Europe who do feel that the deal that this government, the last government, negotiated is not good enough for them, and it's made trading much harder for them, which is why they're encouraging of us to reset that relationship and make sure that we get a better deal. It would be better for our country, be better for our businesses and better for our economy. And our number one mission in government is to grow our economy. And so it's very important to be seen in that context as well.
Speaker, it was incredibly pleasing to see the Prime Minister both at NATO and welcoming leaders from across our continent to Blenheim Palace in a historic moment for a reset with Europe after the disastrous legacy that the departing government left behind. Can I ask, did the subject of youth mobility for students and such like arise? And could his government look into repairing this for its soft power, cultural exchange and growth-boosting properties that have been so valued as we're now in a post-Erasmus era?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Look, the reset with our European allies was well received. And there was clearly an appetite to work in a different and better way with the UK, and I think that will stand us in good stead as we go forward. We did have discussions about a closer relationship with our EU allies, but I made it very clear from the outset, as I have done in opposition, that does not mean rejoining the EU, that does not mean going back into the structures of the EU, and it does not mean freedom of movement. And I took the early opportunity to make that clear to our European allies so that we can move forward progressively, but with the right framework in mind. Thank you.
Rachel Muskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for the leadership he showed not just at NATO, but the European political community. Working together and collaborating is important, not least in an unstable world that we're in. Could he set out for the House what discussions he had about the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement in the light of its renegotiation deadlines next year?
Thank you. I was able to have early discussion about the EU-UK trade arrangements of a preliminary sort. There is an appetite for that discussion. Nobody pretends that it's an easy discussion, and I'm pleased to have appointed a minister who will take responsibility for that important work. It does not involve rejoining the EU. It does involve resetting and improving the relationship we have with our EU allies. Thank you.
Sir Julian Smith.
Congratulate the Prime Minister on his election win and wish him the very best in his new role. Building on the last question, the EPC summit seemed very positive. How does he see using this political locus to get the UK in the best possible position for the renegotiation of the TCA in 2026?
I thank the honourable member for his comments. I do think that there is an appetite now for a different discussion about our future relations with the EU, whether that's trade, whether that's education and research, or whether it's security cooperation. I think particularly in light of what's happened in Ukraine, there is a shared sense that there's room for closer work and closer ties there. So they're the three main areas. It's at very early stages, but the reset was very well received by very many European allies, and I was very pleased to have that early opportunity to set out our case. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the international rules-based system is the cornerstone of peace and security. When the Prime Minister talks of a ceasefire in Gaza and implication of the rule of law, what measures is he willing to take to make sure that's implemented? And furthermore, being outside the EU makes us less safe. The populists who want us to turn away from the EU and towards Trump-style isolationism are playing straight into Putin's hands. So what are we doing to get closer to the EU?
Well, on both those points, firstly, in relation to a ceasefire, obviously talks are underway at quite an advanced stage, and we have already urged all sides in the international discussions that I've had to move forward on a ceasefire, because without a ceasefire it's very difficult to envisage the circumstances in which further hostages can come out safely, aid can go in at the scale that's desperately needed, but also a ceasefire can be a foot in the door for the beginning of a process, however remote it may seem at the moment, to a two-state solution. In relation to the EU, look, we've got a shared interest in safety and security with our EU allies, and that was very much the topic of discussion we had at the EPC summit last week.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Prime Minister for his statement. I want to thank him particularly for his commitment to resetting our relationship with the European Union. It is with regret that the deal signed by the party opposite when they were in government did real damage to our economy, put up barriers to trade with the European Union and increased red tape. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that now is the time for a new relationship and to take practical measures to increase our alignment with the European Union, such as the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, so we can help our services and get our economy moving again?
I thank my honourable friend for those questions. Look, I don't think the deal we've got is good enough. I think if you talk to any business that deals with the EU, they would complain that it's not good enough for them. It's made trade harder, not easier, and that's a real problem. So we can do better than that. And the EPC was an early opportunity for us to reset our relationship and begin progress towards that better relationship, whether it's in relation to trade or defence and security, which are both very, very important to us. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts.
And I welcome that the Prime Minister says that there is an appetite for a reset in our relationship with our European neighbours. And of course, a core element of collective European security is collective economic security. He knows that being outside the single market and the custom union has cost the UK economy almost £140 billion. So how will he remedy this toxic Tory legacy by continuing to refuse even considering rejoining these economic structures?
I do think the relationship can improve. I think we can have a better relationship, but I don't think we can simply ignore the referendum and go back into the EU. And in the discussions I had with our European allies, none of them were urging us to take that course. They were interested in the argument we were making about a better relationship and how that can work in relation to trade, in relation to education, in relation to security and defence. And that's why I wanted to be very clear from the outset what our approach is. Thank you.
Joe Morris.